As stats of violence against women and girls soar, it's time to bring you a special investigation led by the Evening Standard into the attitudes of boys at school. It is now calling on the government to move with the times and get tougher on sexist abuse, sexual harassment in schools, as currently there is no category for this type of behaviour, meaning it's not measured nor tracked. David Cohen, investigations editor at the Evening Standard, joined me earlier to talk through his findings.
This phenomenon, the Andrew Tate phenomenon, who's rose to prominence about 18 months to 2 years ago as this really toxic social influencer, particularly influencing young boys. And so we wanted to go into the classroom and to hear, what do young boys talk about when they talk about girls and when adults are not in the room? And what do girls talk about when they are talking about boys of their age talking about girls when adults are not in the room? So we approximated that as, being a fly on the wall as close as possible by setting up some workshops with a moderator in 2 South London schools, one in Croydon and one in Lambeth. And I went in and observed and listened, asking some, having the moderator ask some very pointed questions on the subject. And what emerged, I think, is truly shocking to parents of young girls and truly mortifying to parents of young boys.
Can you share with us some of those shocking things that you found?
So the boys were initially quite reticent to talk. These were 13-year-olds, and one of the questions that was asked was, what age were you when you first accessed porn? And this was very poignant because they started to reveal. The one boy said he was 7 years old, and he said he was sort of tricked into it. So an older boy showed him people having sex online. He didn't even really know what it was. And then another boy said, I was 6, and another boy said, I was 9, I was 12. And so the honesty really was quite, the revelations kept coming. But when we asked them, well, how do you think this might impact the way you relate to girls? There was just fidgeting and silence. And then we asked, is it commonplace for boys to rate girls? And almost every hand went up. This absolutely, almost all boys did it. This was seen as entertainment, it was fun. Yes, some of them understood it was sexist. It wasn't that, it was wrong, but it wasn't that wrong that they wouldn't do it. And then they started talking about, would you call out other boys for doing stuff like that? And they said, it gets a bit awkward, even if boys rate girls or call out so-called compliments or sexual harassment towards girls, like commenting on the size of their backside or something like that, they said it could be dangerous to speak out. You could get stabbed because of it. Now the girls, on the other hand, spoke about, they said, we are subject to harassment on a daily basis. They said, you leave your house and you're treated as fair game. Random boys come up to you and demand to have your snap, which is your Snapchat handle. And well, then immediately there's someone you've just met. If you don't give it to them, they said can chase you down the road. Sometimes boys much older, one girl said, I'm 14, how old are you? Why are you approaching much younger girls? This is completely inappropriate. Having to fend off these boys for which this sort of behavior has become completely normalized. So it's very interesting. In the workshop we did with girls, the head of year 9 sat very quietly on the side, and right towards the end, she asked the girls, she said, do you feel more confident calling out racist abuse than sexist abuse? And to a person, every girl said, absolutely. Racist abuse and homophobic abuse in schools the lines are very clearly delineated. Every person who is subject to it feels very emboldened and empowered to speak out, and there's zero tolerance. With sexist abuse, it's very blurred, grey lines, and they don't feel empowered to speak out. Often in cases of young black girls we spoke to, they were saying that they feel this is the sort of intersectionality between race and gender. They said they feel often complaining about the behavior of black boys towards them. They felt bad about it because these boys were also suffering from racist abuse themselves. So they didn't want to make things worse by calling out sexist abuse. So they felt like in a double bind. But that generalized feeling of sexist abuse, of girls not knowing what they could call out and what they couldn't, was something we found across the board. And this head of year said she listened to these girls. She was 27, as I said, so one of the younger teachers, more in touch. And she said she was completely blown away. She had no idea that those girls were having to go through this on a daily basis. And she said, what we need, clearly, the girls need safe spaces to talk about what they're going through. And that's what had happened effectively in our workshop, and that the boys need some sort of re-education as to what is okay, what is appropriate, and what is not. I mean, one of the things we talked about that came up is, and I hadn't mentioned, which was really serious, is the passing of inappropriate images. Now, this is something which I thought would be extremely rare. But it turns out that both the boys and the girls said this happens all the time with inappropriate images, not of some porn star or something on the internet. This is inappropriate images of girls in their school, sometimes in their class, being passed around. And the moderator made it very clear to the boys that passing on those images is a criminal offence, which very few of them knew anything about that.
David, I'm interested to know your opinions on what impacts this will all have on relationships later down the line.
I think there's two worries. The one is that it impacts women's confidence. It makes them also feel that they have to be submissive. And I think it creates expectations in the man of having to behave in a certain way that they see through porn, which they're unlikely to be able to meet those expectations. So it will create feelings of ineptitude and lack of confidence too in the men, and it will create unrealistic expectations, and not just unrealistic but unwanted expectations of the kind of relationships that they might have. The other thing that we looked at was the impact on school exclusions, because there's been this huge rise in exclusions in the last 4 years. Something like 133% rise in school exclusions in the last 5 years, and the last spring term, which is the last is the most recent term for which the Department for Education have given out data. I think 232,000 pupils were excluded from high schools, suspended, the highest in a single term in a generation. Now, when you ask the Department for Education what percentage of these rising exclusions, or what percentage of exclusions is for sexist abuse, they have no idea. And the reason is, this is quite shocking, that there is no category for sexist abuse. There's a category for racist abuse, for homophobic abuse, for commenting on a gender identity or someone's sexual orientation. But if you sexually harass a young woman, or you are misogynistic, or you even physically attack the woman, there is no category for sexist abuse. It would just go under a general catch-all of verbal abuse or physical abuse or bullying. The result is that nobody has a clue whether this is rising or falling, or the extent, what part of the rise in exclusions is due to sexist abuse. And the Evening Standard is today calling for this to be remedied. and for the new government, the Department for Education of whoever forms the new government, to create a 17th category, which would be something like misogynistic behavior and sexist abuse, which would allow us to measure and track sexist abuse in schools. We don't want the result of this to be a huge increase in a mass expulsion of boys for sexist abuse or sexist behavior. We also need an innovation that educates boys as to what is appropriate.
Well, to find out more and follow the Evening Standard's campaign, head to its website.